The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Leng. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am reviewing the Survivor cards in Heart of the Elders, the third Mythos pack in the Forgotten Age cycle. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. There are 3 Survivor cards in this pack, so without further ado, let's get started. The first Survivor card in the pack is Live and Learn. It's a free event with a wild skill icon and the spirit trait. It has the game text, Fast. Play after a skill test you failed ends. After resolving all effects from the failed test, attempt that test again. You get +2 skill value for this test. Now, Lucky has been a permanent fixture of Survivors and off-class Survivor decks since the core set because it is one of the few cards in the game that can snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. If you're paying 1 resource to play Lucky, the skill value bonus it provides should be enough to put you over the top and pass the test. If not, you're probably playing Lucky wrong. Live and Learn is a new take on the Lucky mechanic, which has its pros and cons. On the plus side, Live and Learn is a resource cheaper than Lucky, making it an interesting option to consider for Dark Horse decks. Lucky can be difficult to play sometimes in combination with Dark Horse since you've got to sit on that resource, which nullifies your Dark Horse bonuses. That's not the case with Live and Learn. Live and Learn has also got a wild skill icon, which is a nice bonus, although I don't see myself committing it to skill tests all that often. Live and Learn isn't quite as versatile as Lucky, though. Lucky is a viable option during Investigate, Fight, and Evade actions, as well as skill tests on most Treachery cards. Live and Learn is nice to have in your back pocket during Investigate, Fight, and Evade actions, but it won't do you much good if you draw Rotting Remains during the Mythos phase. A well-timed Lucky can mitigate the amount of horror you take from that Treachery. Live and Learn, on the other hand, will not. Live and Learn is also weaker than Lucky because you've got to fail the skill test before you can play it. Failing a test can be quite bad depending on the skill test and the chaos token you pull from the bag. For example, if you're failing a skill test against an enemy with the Retaliate or Alert keywords, Lucky is a great option since it could prevent the Retaliate or Alert keyword from triggering. Live and Learn doesn't save you in this situation. You're going to take some damage and horror before you can attempt the skill test again. You will get +2 skill value during the second test, which is good, but there's no guarantee that you're going to pass it since you're still at the mercy of the Chaos Bag. If you're really unlucky and happen to fail the skill test again, Retaliate or Alert will trigger again, which means you could end up taking even more damage and horror, which would be pretty devastating. Now, Live and Learn is a very good card for an investigator such as Calvin Wright. One of the problems that I've experienced playing Calvin is that he tends to be quite slow until he gets set up. One of the primary ways that Calvin does get set up is by failing skill tests on Treachery cards such as Rotting Remains. If Calvin fails the skill test on Rotting Remains, he'll take some horror, which in turn boosts his willpower and intellect. Unfortunately, until Calvin sets up, he's going to fail a lot of Investigate, Fight, and Evade actions. Failing those tests is a real tempo killer, which often results in Calvin falling behind the encounter deck and eventually going down to defeat. Live and Learn may help Calvin alleviate some of that tempo loss. It won't help him against Rotting Remains, but it does give him another bite at the apple, so to speak, while investigating low shroud locations at the beginning of a scenario. If you're playing Live and Learn in combination with Lucky and Rise to the Occasion, Calvin can be a little more aggressive at the beginning of a scenario, offsetting some of that tempo loss while he gets set up, which may help him keep pace with the agenda deck in the long run. Lucky is such a powerful card that I think most players would jump at the chance to play 4 copies of it if they could. They can almost do that now with the release of Live and Learn. Live and Learn may not be quite as versatile as Lucky, and there's still a margin for error when you attempt the skill test again, but it does help maintain your tempo, which is extremely important in this game. Live and Learn is strong enough to make the cut in a lot of Survivor and off-class Survivor decks, and it may be a viable alternative to Lucky in Dark Horse decks looking to shave off a resource here or there. Calvin Wright likes this card a lot too. Calvin needs to really move a little bit faster, and I think Live and Learn may help him bridge that gap between the start of the scenario and the time he gets set up later in the scenario. He can be a little bit more aggressive and take some of those investigate actions and hopefully pass them. The second Survivor card in the pack is Take Heart. The first skill with no skill icons. Take Heart has the innate trait and the game text max 1 committed per skill test. You may commit Take Heart to any type of skill test. If this skill test fails, the performing investigator draws 2 cards and gains 2 resources. Take Heart is a really exciting card for survivors because card draw and resource generation have never been their strengths. The class has received only one other card, Madame Labranche, an asset from a Phantom of Truth that lets them do either, and she comes loaded with restrictions. Take Heart appears to have a pretty debilitating restriction of its own, that is, you only get the cards and resources if you fail a skill test. However, I'd be willing to argue that Take Heart's restriction isn't much of a restriction at all for a class that already has cards such as Look What I Found, Dumb Luck, and Rabbit's Foot, which also reward you for failing skill tests. Intentionally failing a skill test is not as hard as it may seem at first for most survivors. Calvin Wright is going to fail a lot of skill tests as he tries to get set up, while Ashcan Pete, Silas Marsh, and William York can simply take an investigate action at a high shroud location. Wendy can always initiate a fight action against an enemy twice her size. As long as that enemy doesn't have the retaliate keyword, Wendy is probably in the clear. Now, it may seem like you're wasting an action to play Take Heart, but it would cost you an action to play a card like Emergency Cash, and I think Take Heart is as good, if not better, than that card for survivors. If a survivor is engaged with an enemy and needs to play Emergency Cash, he or she will still suffer an attack of opportunity. That is certainly not the case with Take Heart. They can still play it as part of a fight action, and if they fail, they get the cards and resources which may help them in the battles to come. If Take Heart does have a downside, it's the lack of skill icons as you transition into the mid to late game. Its value dips if your investigator is already flush with cards and resources and you just need a bunch of skill icons to push through those last few tests as you're finishing the game. That said, survivors do have plenty of ways of putting cards to good use if they don't want to happen to play them. One that comes to mind immediately is Cornered, that talent from the Boundary Beyond. So I think this is really a minor quibble. Survivors have so many ways of burning cards for other effects that not having any skill icons really isn't that too bad. Whenever you look at a new skill, especially a survivor skill, you need to think about Min Tae Fan and Silas Marsh. Take Heart gives Min another source of guard draw, which is something she likes to have to fuel her special ability. If Min has all the cards and resources she needs, she can give Take Heart a wild skill icon when she commits it to a test in the mid to late game, which is a nice bonus to have. As for Silas, his ability synergizes very well with Take Heart. If Silas commits Take Heart to a skill test, pulls a Chaos token, and is about to succeed, Silas can pull Take Heart back to his hand with his response, saving it for a skill test that he will fail. If Silas pulls an Elder Sign, he can pull Take Heart out of his discard pile, commit it to the skill test, and then return it to his hand. He can't do that, I should say, with Emergency Cash. Now, Silas's Elder Sign effect is +0, so there is a chance he will fail a test even if he pulls an Elder Sign. I, for one, am quite curious to see how many cards and resources Silas could generate during a typical scenario with Take Heart. Sadly, Take Heart does not synergize with the asset Try and Try Again. It lets you return a skill card to your hand if the skill test fails. When you're resolving a skill test, Try and Try Again triggers before Take Heart, which means Take Heart won't resolve if you happen to return it to your hand with Try and Try Again. So no combo there, unfortunately. If the player cards in City of Archives are any indication, Take Heart is part of a series of cards in this cycle that will help investigators generate cards and or resources. I really like this card because it's incredibly thematic, and it gives survivors another way to generate cards and resources besides emergency cash. Ashcan Pete and Wendy could certainly use the cards to pitch to their respective abilities, while Yorick may take a shine to this card to fuel his own abilities, as well as cornered that survivor talent released in Boundary Beyond. And at this point, I haven't even considered whether off-class survivors such as Agnes, Finn, Lola, and Marie would be interested in Take Heart. With the exception of Lola, most of the investigators on this list have very little access to card draw, which is always helpful in card games. The fact that you get 2 resources on top of those 2 cards may make Take Heart very appealing for cash-strapped mystics such as Agnes and Marie. All in all, Take Heart is one of those cards that I get more and more excited about the more I talk about it, because it's just loaded with possibilities. Really good stuff from the designers here in this case. The final survivor card in the pack is Against All Odds. It's a 2-cost event that costs 2 experience points. It has a willpower, combat, and agility skill icon and the spirit trait. It has the game text Fast. Play when you would perform a skill test with a difficulty higher than your base skill value. Reveal X additional chaos tokens for this skill test. Choose one to resolve and ignore the rest. X is the difference between the skill test's difficulty and your base skill value. And here I thought I was done with math for this batch of reviews. I guess I'll have to pull out my calculator one more time for this card. Now, Chaos Bag manipulation is typically associated with mystics, but survivors do have a few tricks up their sleeves dating back to the core set. Wendy Adams' response, for example, lets you discard a card from your hand to cancel a chaos token, return it to the bag, and then reveal a new chaos token. Will to Survive, a 4-cost asset, lets you ignore the chaos bag entirely until the end of your turn. Speaking of Wendy, Against All Odds is an event, so don't forget that she can target it with her Wendy's amulet. The value of Against All Odds really hinges on the difference between the difficulty of the skill test and the investigator's base skill value. That means that some investigators are going to be able to leverage it for certain skill tests better than others. For example, if you're playing Ashcan Pete, you're probably using this to rig intellect or combat skill tests, while Silas would likely play it during either a willpower or intellect skill test. Against All Odds may appeal to Wendy, who has a combat skill value of 1, while Yorick may want to consider it for intellect skill tests. Of course, if you're considering a card that targets an investigator's base skill value, you should really be talking about Calvin Wright. For example, if Calvin happens to draw Rotting Remains, he gets to reveal 3 additional tokens for a total of 4. If he investigates a 4-shroud location, such as Miskatonic University, he gets to reveal 4 additional tokens for a total of 5. Against All Odds may let you draw a pile of tokens from the Chaos Bag, but you only get to resolve 1 of them. If your skill value isn't high enough to begin with, you're still going to fail at the skill test. For example, Calvin Wright can investigate a 4-shroud location such as Miskatonic University, but he will still fail that skill test if his skill value is only 2. Against All Odds will improve your chance of success, but it's not a miracle worker, so you need to keep that in mind. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the math to see how Against All Odds stacks up. We're going to assume that we're using a Chaos Bag similar to that for Threads of Fate, which typically contains 16 tokens. There are 5 special tokens, each with a value of -2. We'll also assume the Elder Sign is a +0. As you can see from this chart, Against All Odds significantly improves your chance of success as long as you get to reveal at least 1 additional token from the Chaos Bag. If you happen to be playing Calvin Wright, who often reveals 4 or even 5 tokens, Against All Odds is almost guarantees that you will pass this skill test as long as your skill value is equal to or greater than the skill test difficulty. Based on the math, Against All Odds is a very solid pickup for most survivors. Revealing even just one additional token improves an investigator's chance of success significantly, as long as their skill value is equal to or greater than the skill difficulty before the pull. If you're playing Calvin Wright, Against All Odds is nothing short of amazing, all but guaranteeing success on many tests where you're pulling 4 or 5 tokens, which, if you happen to be playing Calvin, is going to be most tests. Against All Odds does cost 2 resources, which may make it a little too expensive for survivors who are running Dark Horse. If resources aren't an issue, however, and you need to pass a certain skill test, Against All Odds is going to be a very formidable tool in your arsenal. Those are the Survivor cards in Heart of the Elders. This is nothing short of an incredible pack for survivors. Live and Learn is almost like running a 3rd or even a 4th copy of Lucky in your deck. It's not quite as versatile as its core set counterpart, and there is still a margin for error on that second test. But Live and Learn will help you pass skill tests that you would have failed, which in turn helps your tempo. Take Heart is another amazing addition to the class. Survivors don't have much in the way of card draw or resource generation, and Take Heart happens to do both. You do need to fail a skill test to trigger Take Heart, but that shouldn't be too difficult for most survivors to arrange. For most of them, even just taking a simple investigate action at a high shroud location is enough to do the trick. I also wouldn't be surprised to see this card crop up in a lot of off-class survivor decks that are looking for some additional card draw. Finally, you've got Against All Odds, which gives survivors a great chaos bag manipulation tool. Drawing even one additional token significantly improves your odds of success as long as your skill value is equal to or greater than the skill test difficulty. If you're able to draw 3 or even 4 tokens if you're playing somebody like Calvin Wright, you're almost guaranteed to succeed. If you enjoy playing Survivor, you definitely need to pick up this pack. That's going to do it for my review. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you'd like to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.